As we kick off Autism Awareness Month, Easterseals Arkansas would like to welcome you to our very special webinar series, The Race for Understanding. We're excited to bring you this three-part series hosted by Easterseals Arkansas CEO Ron Ekstrand. Featuring special guest Aaron Likens. Aaron serves as the Autism Ambassador for various Easterseals affiliates, is the author of the book Finding Kansas, and is currently living his dream as a flagman for the NTT IndyCar Series. During this webinar series, Aaron will share his advice, insights, and personal experiences of living on the autism spectrum, covering three different topics: education, employment, and independent living. In this first webinar, we'll focus on education and autism, where Aaron will share what it has been like being a student in public schools as well as homeschooling. His insights will be useful to current students, educators, and parents. We'll also open up the discussion for a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please send us your questions in the Q&A tab. Thank you for joining us, and please enjoy this insightful discussion.
Hello, this is Ron Ekstrand, CEO for Easterseals Arkansas, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the first of our three webinars today. Actually, they're more like conversations with someone I've known for quite a while. His name is Aaron Likens. Aaron is the author of the book Finding Kansas. He also is serving as our Autism Ambassador here at Easterseals Arkansas. And most recently, Aaron, within the past year, has been named flagman for the NTT Indy Racing Series, and that has been a lifelong dream of his. Today's session, this first segment, will be about education. The second and third will be about employment and living independently in the community. So for the next hour or so, we will be talking to Aaron. I'll be interviewing him, and we would very much welcome your comments and your questions that you want to send. So please look for that in the webinar where there's a Q&A section, and submit your questions and they will get them to me, and we will answer them live here at the end of our session. So Aaron, welcome, and so glad to have you here in Arkansas again.
So glad to be back.
Let's start with your book and when you decided to write it and when you were diagnosed. So what year were you diagnosed and how old were you?
I was 20, so December of 2003 was my diagnosis. And back then, like so many individuals, there just wasn't the awareness out there. I got my diagnosis, but my doctor didn't know what it meant. He sent me to go get an assessment, and he was reading the assessment in front of me, and he was as confused as I was as to what Asperger's meant. So that evening, well, my doctor told me good luck, which leaves me to fend for myself on trying to find information. So went on the all-knowing internet, because everything on the internet must be true, right? First thing I read stated that people with Asperger's will never have a job, will never have friends, will never be happy. Horrible introduction, and unfortunately, I believe those words. And in life, autism spectrum or not, if you believe the no, don'ts, and can'ts, that's exactly what's going to happen. And that's what happened to me. And for 15 months, horrible depression, horrible sadness. Every day I woke up wondering, what am I going to do with my life? What's the point? There's no hope. There's no hope. And that I must have told my dad, there's no hope, at least 10,000 times. 15 months later, my body, my brain, I like to think a proverbial fuse blew, because one evening I sat down at my computer and I started to write. Now, I hated writing in school, hated it, worst thing in the world. My goal in writing was to say as little as possible, as quick as possible, to get the article done. But the first chapter I wrote, it was like 25 pages, single space, thank goodness for editors, but 25 pages, single space. Next night, wrote 3 things, about 40 more pages, single spaced. And for the first time, I was expressing myself.
Mm-hmm.
If you asked me anything back then, subjective, anything emotional, especially emotions, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Broken record, I don't knows. But through all the I don't knows, writing, wrote more, and eventually got a book over the next about year and a half of writing, and never intended on writing a book. I just wanted to tell my family who I was and why I was, because I couldn't speak it. So the fact that I've had messages internationally, people that have read my book, there was no intention of that. There was no intention of becoming a public speaker, because public speaking really scared me. I'm actually really shy. People that see me at presentations don't believe that, but there wasn't this goal of doing this. I just needed some outlet to communicate my emotions.
Got it. So that's what prompted you to write the book. Let's talk a little bit about presentations. I know numbers really resonate and they stick with you, and dates. Tell me how many presentations you've done so far, and how many people you've spoken to over the years.
So for over the course of the past 11 years, 1,033 presentations to 94,850-ish people. So closing in on that 100,000 mark.
So let's talk about the book here. You write the book to have people help understand you, what you're feeling, what's going on inside you. I want to applaud you. First of all, it's a very insightful book, but it's also very vulnerable. You share a lot of things that must have been difficult for you to share. And how did writing the book change your life in terms of how you were able to understand yourself and other people to understand you?
Before I wrote the book, I had zero self-awareness of one incident that happened before I wrote the book. I had a girlfriend, and one night we bowled on the same bowling team. And one Monday night, she came in with an outfit that was just, I've been all around the world and I'm not seeing anything remotely close to it. It's indescribable.
So very fashion forward.
Oh, I think she was auditioning for a role in a Star Wars movie that was yet to be produced from a planet nobody's ever heard of.
Got it.
It was that far out there, and other people looked at her oddly. But when I saw her, I said, what is that? Really innocent. And she got very upset. My teammates later informed me that she was giving me the death stare, just looking straight into my soul. And I was oblivious, had no idea. It became her turn to bowl, and she didn't even have her bowling shoes on yet because she was so mad. So I just proudly looked at her and said, "You're up." And that made her even more mad. I was oblivious. About 2 years after that event, as I was writing, I was going to have a chapter about that. Oh, this chapter, for once, I was going to have a chapter that I wasn't the one making the mistake. It was someone else, because how dare she get upset at me asking something so factual? Well, as I was writing it and seeing it from the third person, not from my eyes, I started out writing really quick, really quick. I mean, it was a symphony of keyboard sounds. And as I got closer to the "what is that" statement, my writing slowed down. And then when I got to "what is that?" quotation mark, what is that? Oh, oddly enough, that chapter sadly didn't make it into the book. I don't think one of the few chapters I didn't finish. But writing that, I, for the first time, saw it from the other angle. Before that, I would have never even have known what had happened or how it happened, because the person, why would they get mad? There's no reason to be mad. It's a simple question. What is that? I couldn't see that somebody would take offense to those words.
I see. So how did you go from writing the book to then talking about it and giving the presentations, and describe some of the audiences, the range of people that you've spoken to?
I'm still trying to figure out how I went from author to public speaker. I mean, you had a huge role in that. Started presenting for you in 2010 at the St. Louis County Police Academy, which I was petrified. I'm shy, I'm quiet. So what do I have to say that anyone's going to listen to? That's what I thought. So started out at the police academy, and the reviews right off the bat were really high. And since then, done a lot of law enforcement all the way up to the top levels of the FBI, school districts, teachers. One thing I love is presenting to student bodies. That might be one of my favorite audiences because the questions there are so insightful. And I tell everyone on my Facebook page, if you want hope for the future, just listen to some of the questions. I wish we could somehow bottle up that magic and give it to anyone that needs just a little bit of hope. Because when you hear a 7th grader hear one of the stories I tell and see it from a different angle and say, well, couldn't the person have said it this way for there to be more understanding? It's like, nobody's ever thought of that. So I get so much hope for the future from presenting to students. But parents, I've presented to conservation officers. And each time I get a new segment of society that I present to, sometimes I'll look and go, why do they need it? And then when I present and they tell me stories of their interactions, it's like, oh, this is needed. So
recently you did something in Southern California for the zoo there. You want to
yes,
explain what you did on that?
For Easterseals, Southern California, they the LA County Zoo wanted, as they start opening back up, they wanted training on how their staff can better interact and engage people on the autism spectrum. So I teamed up with some of their behavior analysts, and it was really beneficial. A lot of the comments from the staff were, well, we didn't know we needed this, but after this was the best thing ever. And that's a common theme in all segments of society of, we didn't know we needed this, but then they think back to previous interactions they had, and it's, oh my goodness, I've actually had interactions with people on the spectrum. I just didn't know it.
So helping to spread awareness and understanding has become a mission of yours. So the book you wrote after you were out of school, so you were diagnosed later in life. What do you wish you would have known about yourself that you know now back when you were in school? What would have been useful for you to have learned about yourself, because you didn't know you had this thing called autism or Asperger's syndrome?
I think a great question. I think one of the main things would have been the ability to self-advocate, the ability to know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. Sensory issues were strong for me. I had severe issues. Fire drills were just horrible. And bass,
A bass drum.
or I remember in 1st grade music class, we were learning what bass was. So the teacher turned off everything except the bass. The room is shaking. And I remember I rose my hand. I said, this hurts. Yeah, it was hurting. And the teacher, I mean, this is 1989, sensory issues. That's not something that was a common, not commonly said. And the teacher said, no, it doesn't. So I don't fault anyone for that, because again, Asperger's is still at that point in time 5 years from getting put in the DSM. So how was she supposed to know that? Yes, I was actually hurting from the bass in the room. So that ability to self-advocate and then not question why I was feeling that way. So here I am hurting, being told it doesn't hurt. Am I defective? Am I wrong? That's the only conclusion that can come then, because I said something and it wasn't validated and it was actually challenged. Therefore, who am I and what is this?
So one of the things that you described in your presentations is, in particular, the impact of the fire drills and the pattern that you learned. Why don't you share that story with us?
Yeah, so I'm now under the impression that if you truly want a fire drill, you need to randomize it. Otherwise, it sort of loses its benefit. Well, the school I went to in Indianapolis, if we were going to have a fire drill, it was always on a Thursday. So in first grade, I was told it doesn't hurt. Well, now in second grade, the fire drill is causing pain, but every fire drill, I would look around the room. Nobody else nobody else was in any discomfort. Half the class was enjoying it because it meant they got to go outside and quit what they were doing. So I'm super confused. Why am I feeling this? Nobody else is feeling this. Well, I formulated a plan. And this goes back to being able to advocate for oneself. We on the spectrum, some of us aren't good at expressing what we need. So we find other ways to achieve the same goal. So my awesome idea was I became a very good actor. And every Thursday morning, I eventually, if I would have kept acting, I think I would have eventually won the Academy Award for best headache, throat or stomach ache that didn't exist. I put on some award-winning performances. Enough doctor visits, though, my dad figured something was going on. So I had to up my game. I had to adapt. So as they quit believing me, my parents, I started, thermometer, coffee, works great to have a fever in the morning. And when I present to student bodies, I let them know, don't do that, because when you proudly show a fever of 107.7, you lose all credibility. The trick never works again. And even when you are sick, you get sent to school. So that backfired.
Yeah, I believe your dad said that you must be a zombie, therefore zombies can go to school. So you went to zombie school.
It was, he said I was in fact dying and the school nurse would take real good care of me.
There you go. So in terms of your school experience, describe a little bit about what it was like and where the challenges were for you when you were going to school.
The challenges in school were definitely on the social aspect. I just wanted to talk about weather and the Indy 500. Those were my two subjects, and I would talk on, and my classmates would wander off. I'd follow them. I didn't pick up on the social cue that when somebody is backing away from you, that means they're not interested. Well, I just follow and continue giving the weather report. And then the 7-day forecast, if it were a Monday, Mondays were awesome, home of the 5-day forecast, and eventually the 7-day forecast. Same thing, Mondays were great because I talked about the previous weekend's races that were on television, and Fridays was a preview of what was coming up, and had no idea that my classmates didn't have the same level of buy-in that I did. So there was a social divide. I wasn't really picked on. If I was bullied, I don't remember it because I was so focused on my areas of interest that I was oblivious to what was going on around me. That hyper focus on those interests, though, did make it a challenge for subjects that I had no buy-in on. Okay, why do I need to learn about this? There's no weather and there's no auto racing. Next, please. That really, the attitude didn't sit well with the teachers.
So do you think that the subjects that you didn't find as interesting could have been made more interesting if there was some way for you to incorporate the things that you were interested in? Like, how do you do math using weather ideas or racing concepts?
Absolutely, and sometimes it worked too well. I was great at math, a horrible student, but great at math. And long division, I just had no interest in. It was just too long.
Thus the name.
Thus the name. Well, in fourth grade, we were figuring out average speeds. Oh, average speeds, boring. But when the teacher said, okay, Aaron, here's a notebook. I want you to figure out how long it would take the Indy 500 winner if they averaged 1 mile an hour, and go up by half-mile in increments till you get to 200. Okay, I did the work, but much to the dismay of her, I was doing it in other subjects. I mean, it was math all day long, but I got to do the work. I had no interest till she tied the fact that, hey, average speed, you can figure out how fast the Indy 500 would take if that. So utilizing that, definitely. I go back to second grade. In second grade, I again, bad student, but knew a lot. And my my outlook of the world was very small. It was all weather and auto racing. Well, to sort of open my eyes to the world, my second grade teacher said, "Okay, Aaron, where's Formula One racing this weekend?" And this was near the end of the school year. And I said, "Oh, Silverstone." Then she asked the most life-changing question of my life. She said, "Okay, Aaron, where is Silverstone?" So I thought back into my mind, trying to figure out what the announcers on ESPN had said about where they were racing next week. Silverstone, England. Then she teed the ball up, and this was the home run hit when she said, "Okay, Aaron, where is England?" I don't know, where is England? Right then, my interest, my love of the world formed right then.
Wow.
That one singular question. And when I present to teachers, I say, if you can somehow use an existing interest to springboard to others, some interests aren't going to be possible. But if you can find that right combination, that one singular question just opened my eyes to the entire world.
That's fantastic. That's an amazing story. Let's talk about the book title, Finding Kansas, because it relates to what you were just talking about. Why don't you tell us what Kansas is? Because it's not about the Wizard of Oz, and it's not the state. So
it's not the state, and I thank goodness I've driven across it 7 times. 8 hours of your life you can never get back. But no, it's a concept, and clinicians will say that a person on the autism spectrum will have an area of defined interest or knowledge that they're going to want to talk about to the exclusion of everything else. That's really long, really wordy. And instead, I said, okay, if you could only function, if you were socially paralyzed in every state except Kansas, but in Kansas you could talk without overprocessing and just felt at ease, what state would you want to live in?
mm-hmm.
That's going to be Kansas. And Kansas for us on the autism spectrum is going to be that topic or interest that we're going to want to talk about for 6 hours and not take a breath and have no idea that you're not listening, but we're going to have the time of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So Kansas is that topic for me. It was weather sort of phased out 7th, 8th grade or so. Auto racing has always been on top, but it's that interest that we're going to be motivated to study, to learn, to talk about more so than any other topic. And that's where if a student's Kansas can be used in another subject, there can be a much bigger buy-in because that Kansas is the motivator.
Got it. When you came up with this concept, I recall you telling me that it was someone had talked to you after you were in your element. You were a race director for a karting series. Tell us how that.
Yeah, so it was 2006. It was my first year as a race director. So a series in the Midwest, I was race director and flagman of. And over the course of the day, 2 drivers, it was a practice day, 2 drivers came up and talked to me, and I was energetic, somewhat humorous, great conversation. And at the end of the day, those 2 drivers, they tried to talk to me. I wasn't the same person. Another chapter in my book is entitled Alias, and in that I sort of describe how I can be a race director, and it was somewhat prophetic because it's the same way I can be a public speaker. But the chapter states that, let's take right now. I'm not Aaron Likens. I'm Aaron, the autism ambassador and author who seems to know what he's talking about. So
You're playing a role.
I'm playing a role, exactly. So as race director, I'm playing the role of race director, and I have the rule book that dictates what I do and how I should say it. So those 2 drivers earlier in the day met me as race director.
And they were talking probably about the race.
Exactly. At the end of the day, those same 2 drivers tried to talk to me on different subjects. They got nothing out of me. They got answers of least resistance, which is usually a no or I don't know. I was very closed off, no eye contact whatsoever. And one of the drivers, he wasn't trying to be mean. He was thoroughly confused, which I've talked to teachers that will have a student like this. If they're in their Kansas, they can be the life of the room, energetic, knowledgeable, but one quick change and they'll be like me at the end of the race day when the driver said, "Hey, are you sure you're that same guy we were talking to earlier?" For me, that was a heartbreaking moment. Yeah, I didn't realize up until that point just how big of a chasm there was between Kansas and not. So that evening I wrote the chapter that became the Kansas concept, because the race was in Carrollton, Missouri, but not many people know where Carrollton was. So even on our race schedule, it was Kansas City. Finding Kansas City, though, just didn't sound right. So drop the city, finding Kansas. So Kansas gets credit, even though the story happened in Missouri.
Related to the idea of Kansas, this notion, you talked about in school some struggles and challenges you had. One was sensory, that sound for you in particular can create a reaction in your body. You also talked about subjects that you weren't interested in, that if everything could have been about racing and weather would have been fine by you. And you talked about the social aspect. In your book, you talk about, with regard to some of the challenges with social interaction, this notion of game theory. And I think it's a fascinating insight that you've gained in terms of what the challenge is for you and perhaps others on the spectrum.
Yeah, so the game theory concept, I love rules. Rules are amazing. Rules are awesome. And I've in my full presentation, I've presented that concept about 700 times, and I have much more understanding now than I did when I wrote the chapter. So in my presentations, I'll show a picture of a Monopoly board. And I will now say, just imagine playing Monopoly, but you just rolled a 9 and landed on Boardwalk, where there's 22 hotels and 19 houses, and that's way against the rules. But there's also a king on Boardwalk that's now in check from the knight that's around the corner on Community Chest. No, by the way, you landed on a triple word space, so I hope you have some good letters to play off the word library, which is on luxury tax. Huh?
Sounds like a jumble.
I've described a board game that's just full of chaos. There's no order, there's no rules. And for me, I've loved games because of the rules. Within the rules, there comes order. And with order, there's no processing. Processing is where I struggle. If I have to figure out, wait, what did he mean by, he said wait, was he trying to be mean, or was he nice? Was that a compliment or not a compliment? The processing just keeps going on and on and on. Might go on for days before I figure out that I can't figure this out. But within a game with set rules, you know what's going to happen in the order that it's going to happen. There's no question on what's going to happen next. And if something out of the ordinary happens, you can go to the rule book and it's going to tell you what to do. You're never going to be in a position where you have to process, what do we do and how do we do it? So I craved routine in school, craved it. And in second grade, I was a terror for substitutes, an absolute terror, because they didn't do it the way it'd been done, which this goes back to advocating. If I would have known, or if there would have been awareness, maybe maybe the substitute, we could have handled our differences better. But one substitute in second grade, and we had her for the entire week. Now, Mrs. Gendra was my second grade teacher, one of the best teachers I ever had, but she decided she needed to go to Florida for vacation for a week. And that week, in the sub's defense, every other kid in the class thought she was the coolest substitute ever, because she came in and she put a wheel on the board. Now, myself, along with many others on the spectrum, spinning things are just awesome. This wheel, though, I don't know where it came from, but it needed to go back because it was segmented into different subjects. She would spin the wheel, and whatever subject came up next would be the next subject we would do.
Oh boy. Lack
No.
of structure, lack of prediction.
And I was the poster child for preparedness. All my books, all my supplies were in the exact order that I needed it. And now
Chaos.
Yeah. First time the wheel spun, my hand went up, and naturally I said, "That's not the way Mrs. Ginger does it." And she was polite about it. She said, "Oh yes, Aaron, I know." Spun the wheel. Second hour, carbon copy. Third hour, carbon copy. Fourth hour, I finally had a debate. My second grade brain finally had a way to debate her counterpoint. I said, "No, no, no, no. We have a schedule. It's right by the wheel." She looked and she said, "Oh, yeah." She walked over, ripped the schedule off the wall, threw it on the floor, and spun the wheel. And she didn't talk to me for that whole week. Well, following Monday, when my second grade teacher came back, I didn't exactly let her have it, but it was warmer that week in Indianapolis than it was in Florida. And you bet I told her the weather was better at home, so she should have stayed.
Give her a full weather report. So the game theory idea also, you've described like social interactions being difficult to understand what the other individual is meaning by something. It could be a nonverbal cue you don't pick up. It could be the context within which the comment is made, or it could be a literal expression that you take literally when the person didn't really mean it literally. And you have an example of that, or maybe some of the things that you've done in teaching that describe situations like where literal interpretation can be a problem.
Yeah, so imagine the way I see a conversation is I'm playing chess without being able to see the opponent's pieces. So I'm making a move, having no idea if I did the right move or wrong move, which also means if somebody gives a move back, it's very hard to determine what the intent was. So I was the expert at answering rhetorical questions in school. A question like, "Okay, are you going to do the work or are you not going to do the work?" Oh, happy day. You just told me I don't have to do the work.
That's an option now.
That's an option.
That's an option that's been put on the table.
And that type of literal rhetorical question can be very confusing for the teacher as to why the student responded the way they did, but they didn't see the lay of the land. They didn't know the chess game in play at that moment because it's just so confusing for us. So those parents can fall into that trap as well of giving an option, not thinking they're giving an option, but are you going to school or are you not going to school today? Congratulations on me. You just said I'm not going to school. Awesome.
Got it. If you could, so on your Facebook page, you have done a series of the 5 most important things to know about someone on the autism spectrum. And you always caveat that with based on your own personal experience, not trying to say that you're an expert on everyone on the autism spectrum, but from your experience, what would be the top 5 things that you would want people to know about someone on the spectrum?
Yeah, so the top 5 most important statements, in my opinion, on the autism spectrum, coming in at number 5 is living life on the autism spectrum is like living life unfiltered. And that can go 2 ways. One, sensory elements. If there is a sensory issue, I'm going to experience it at an unfiltered level. And in the classroom, that can also be highly, it can make it where we can't concentrate, such as if there's somebody just tapping their pencil on the table, we may hear that at an unfiltered level to where we can't hear the teacher because that noise, everything's at an equal volume level. So you can't
filter it out.
Exactly. I had a hard time filtering it out. Same thing if the walls were thin. I could hear what was going on in that classroom, which sometimes was an advantage because I'd be a day ahead. But then other times I'd be hearing what I heard yesterday and it would just get overwhelming. First 2, and I know this, I'm not alone in this, but first 2 hours of school went by fine. Get to about that 11 o'clock hour, I was exhausted trying to filter out when my brain couldn't filter out.
All that extra stimuli that's coming at you.
Precisely. So I say I was a good actor on fire drill day, but I was having horrible headaches, horrible stomach issues just from the sheer exhaustion that my brain was going through. Life Unfiltered also is with emotions. One of the misnomers out there that I cringe every time I hear it is when people say, oh, well, people on the autism spectrum, they just don't have emotions. Oh, we have all the emotions in the world. One study from several years ago opined that people on the spectrum may have more emotions because they can't express the emotions. So yeah, we do have the emotions. I know myself, I try to not experience them and not express them, which when you do that, emotions build. And when emotion is felt, it's going to be at that unfiltered level. Number 4 is whatever happens first always has to happen. Go back to the 2nd grade substitute. She broke that rule. The schedule wasn't the schedule anymore, but whatever happens first must be. Number 3 is, I think, therefore you should know. That is the big hurdle. And I still struggle to this day. More clinical term for that is theory of mind. I take statements at literal value. I don't know what theory of mind means as a literal sentence. So, and because I coined the term, I think, therefore you should know, describes it a whole lot better. But what that is, and this is where a student in school advocating for ourselves. Why do I need to advocate? Because if I know I need help, everybody's going to know I need help. And in terms of a bullying situation, since I know I'm getting bullied, everyone else does. And if no one's helping, everybody must want it to happen. So even to this day, it's very hard for me to understand. Just because I'm thinking something doesn't mean the person I'm trying to get help from knows. And also starting stories, act 2, very common, because why do I need to give you the backdrop? Since I know it, you already know it.
Got it.
Number 2, be in logical and emotional world. Go back to the what is that story with the girlfriend. What is that? I was just being logical, not understanding there would be emotional impact to that. And number 1, which I did not come up with the saying, I will not take credit for the saying, but it is the most important. And that is, if you met one person with autism, you've only met one person with autism. And that's so important for teachers because, and everyone really, but it's so important because you can so easily fall into the trap of, you find one method that might work for one student, and then you think, okay, that's going to work for everyone. And that might not necessarily be the case.
Got it. I'm going to check and see time-wise. I think we're going to look to see if there's questions that are coming in from our audience. Here's a question. What do you wish your teachers and or classmates knew about you that would have helped you the most be successful at school?
Ooh, good. I wish my classmates would have obviously known what I had, and I wish I would have known what I had, but I did attempt to socialize, and I wanted to attempt to talk about what they found interesting, but I had no idea how to find that common ground. And I just had no buy-in on talking about whoever the musician of the week was. I had a real hard time finding something interesting. Other people, from what I gather, can at least fake for a while. I had no ability. If they started talking, the second they started talking about something that I didn't find interesting, I just wander away. I had no idea how to, and it wasn't explained to me in a way that I understood that maybe that's their Kansas. Maybe that's the way I found auto racing and weather interesting. They found that subject interesting. So some sort of trying to find that common ground. I could socialize in games, and maybe that's where I needed to socialize more. But within a game, you're talking about the game, you have that shared experience then. My teachers, I definitely wish my 2nd grade teacher and my 4th grade teachers were awesome at the utilizing my Kansas,
Mm-hmm.
which was amazing because I wasn't diagnosed yet. So they absolutely changed my life on just the small things they did. My fourth grade teacher let me name the state or name the capital or hold the flashcard when we would play those games. And in presentations, I say in a roundabout way, what am I doing right now? The seeds of public speaking were planted 2 decades plus before they sprouted. So my third grade teacher, she had the mentality of look at me when I talk to you. Eye contact, I just, it overwhelms me. I eventually get to an anxiety response. I'm no longer hearing what you're saying because I'm so overwhelmed with the information of the eye contact. So depending on the teachers, some of my teachers were awesome. Others, if they just knew what the diagnosis was, I think it would have been, my schooling career would have been a whole lot smoother.
So if the past you would have had a current Aaron Likens to come and pay a visit to your school at that time with some awareness, understanding, some explanation, a speaker like yourself sharing your experience, you think that might have helped you and made a huge difference?
A huge difference. But at the same time, myself, I think I needed those challenges to eventually write a book. And myself, life would have been better for sure, but I don't think I would have been a writer in the same way. But so that's what I had to go through, but it was extremely difficult. And absolutely, I would have, that awareness and understanding would have made life a whole lot smoother.
Okay. Here's another question from one of our listeners. What about the layout of the classroom? Is there anything you think teachers should take into consideration about how they've designed the classroom or seating arrangements?
That's a good question, one I've never had before. So very good question. Issues came with various ones, and one that really for myself I struggled with was this was third grade, the horseshoe desk pattern, where it's open on the teacher side, but all the desks are connected back and together. I struggled because the student to my left and the student to my right would talk over me. I'm trying to do my work and remember that unfiltered thing I was struggling with. And for some reason, they thought it'd be fun to throw a pencil over my table or desk and throw it over. And that was just extremely distracting. The only time I had a verbal outburst in class was when that pencil just kept flying over my desk for one entire week. Go back to the advocating for myself. It seemed like it was just a random explosion out of me. But I've been stewing for a week. I think therefore you should know. They should already know they're annoying me, even though I'm giving them absolutely no indication that I'm being annoyed. And they quit after that, which I could have said on Tuesday instead of exploding on Friday. Hey, this is annoying me. Could you please quit? But I couldn't do that. So when I was in the front of the class with minimum visual distractions, for me, that was a lot smoother, a lot easier to pay attention because I didn't have all the visual stimuli of every movement, every whisper, every whatever kids do. But when I was in the front of the classroom for myself, it was a lot easier.
Okay. Here's a question. Do you remember a classmate from school that you felt understood you or was nice to you? And what characteristics did that person have?
Oh, absolutely. Third, fourth, fifth grade, my friend Tony. Oddly enough, he liked auto racing. So that right there, just a natural fit. And yeah, there was understanding there. I can't describe what that looked like, but when you have a shared interest, obviously things are going to go much smoother than if there's no common ground. But yeah, that just buddy, that person that's going to look out for you.
Yep.
It's really indescribable when you think back to that one or two friends that you had growing up that just got you and you didn't have to do anything. When parents and teachers do ask that friendship question, I do say that that shared ground, that shared interest is vital. And thinking back, absolutely.
And so follow up on that is, have you kept in contact with that person?
Yes, he found me on Facebook about a decade ago.
Okay,
So he comments every so often, but yeah.
excellent. Let's see, here's another question from our viewers. What do you do if you were bored with a subject? Did you push on or did you just not do the work?
Oh, good question. I would, oh, I don't want to sound like I just didn't care, but I would forge ahead as fast as I could, hoping that whatever worksheet it was, homework was challenging. I needed that time to decompress. So I did mention I knew the stuff, but I was a bad student. So I would do something as fast as I could to get out of the way. So true, false, I knew, hey, if I do the first 5 or 10 and there's 20 and I get the first 5 right, I'm already at almost a passing grade. Odds are if I just click off all true, I'm going to get the next half. Hey, that's 60%. I don't have to do the rest of the work. So horrible student. But that boredom factor and needing that time in the afternoon and evening to decompress made the work extremely difficult. And why do I want to do true and false over the Spaniards and the gold in the Caribbean when there's this social studies thing we're doing about states and capitals and world capitals? Yeah, those facts are a lot more interesting, although now I think kids love pirates, I think, but that just did nothing for me. So true. Yeah. So horrible student.
Got another question here. What can the school do to educate students about autism and how to respect differences among the student body?
I have presented to schools to where, there is the privacy factor. They don't want to single out the 1 or 2 students on the autism spectrum. I remember doing a school in Rolla, Missouri, and the principal beforehand, they brought me in because they had one student, she thought, one student that needed the extra support. That's great. But the principal was only aware of one student out of the 600 to 700 students. I presented, it was supposed to be a 40-minute presentation, but during the questions and answers, student after student after student freely said, oh, I'm on the spectrum too. This is really awesome. And afterwards, about 10% of the student body, it was a good 50 to 60 kids said they were on the spectrum. The principal looked like she had seen a ghost because she had no idea just how prevalent it is. So I wish I could just say, hey, have me come and talk to your student body, because that will go a long way, because it's just so magical. But just small things. I wish just the saying "be kind" would just make everything better. But there is something to be said to have somebody that has grown up and lived through it, like myself, and perhaps there's other people that could do that. But it's one thing to say, yes, people on the autism spectrum, you might have a student that if you use sarcasm, they might not understand it. Okay, but what does that actually mean? Mm-hmm. I say a story in 4th grade. I asked if they wanted to do something after school, and they said, oh yeah, we'll do something after school. Really? Great. And I walked off super excited because they said that's what we were going to do. So when students hear somebody that has lived through it, have been through those challenges, I just feel and think there's going to be a much bigger buy-in from the student body than just reading something from a card on what Asperger's is or what the autism spectrum is, and what the characteristics are. Use stories that students might have lived through or might have seen. Use real world examples instead of just well, they might not understand sarcasm. They might not use stuff that's tangible and.
Yeah. So I'm going to plug you because you're coming back on May 12th to Arkansas to present to the DDPA, which is the Developmental Disability Provider Association's spring conference. And they are going to share that across the state to anyone who wants to participate. But this will be your actual presentation where you go through a lot of the concepts and ideas. So that would be a great opportunity for any school that wanted to tune in to hear you talk about your experience.
Oh, absolutely. And for teachers, a lot of the concepts just work in the classroom. And for teachers and really anybody that's providing care for anyone on the spectrum, I mentioned my second and fourth grade teachers and mentioned that they planted seeds that took 20 plus years to have a beautiful harvest. And I think in a way, it's a minor tragedy that teachers, care providers, and anyone can go above and beyond the call of duty and never see the end result. I've tried to find my second and fourth grade teachers. I just can't. Don't know if they're still alive, but I would not be doing what I'm doing today if not what they did for me 3 decades ago.
That's amazing. Teachers have such a lasting impact, and often they don't know what that impact is.
It's almost tear-inducing to think just how many, just what type of impact they can have on a person on the spectrum.
Yeah.
The unemployment rate is extremely high for those with Asperger's, around 80-85%, and a teacher asking that one question, such as where is Silverstone, something that is seemingly insignificant, can have a lifelong impact that can just bring out the human potential that's in all of us.
Here's another question. Did your teacher, did you need your teacher to give you constant praise? Is that something that was important?
Constant praise in things that I tried, yes. That's another question I've never been asked, but absolutely. And it's kind of this is kind of odd. I needed the constant praise, but it meant nothing. I know that I think said an oxymoron or a paradox, but I needed that reinforcement because I couldn't get it from the social encounters. I didn't know. Let's take a game, so to speak. In a game, you have the score, you know where you stand. Socially and academically, I didn't know where I stood. Grades confused me in a way because I was hung up on the words. A C+ to me sounded better than a B-. So that showed you that I didn't really understand grades. So that praise did, in the subjects that I cared about, keep me going.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I'm looking to see what we've got. Okay. Here's one. Did you struggle making friends? And if so, how did you cope with it? Or what did you do? Or what was your way of finding ways to make friends?
Friends were an interesting conundrum for me because Monopoly doesn't really work by yourself. Trades are just way too easy when you're playing Monopoly, playing 2 people as one. So I did need someone to play games with or discuss races, the previous weekend's races with. In terms of needing friends, I didn't need friends. I've heard from a lot of parents they're concerned about their kid that, there might be a lack of friends. And I say, well, do they want them? But yeah, being thrust into a situation where others want me to attempt to make friends. If you don't have that common interest, it's just going to be awkward for everybody. That's the way it was for me. Now, other people might need a big social circle, but I myself, I wanted high quality over quantity. And just that 1 or 2 friends, that was good enough for me, because you get more than that and it became really confusing to say a story to person A and not know if they were going to say it to person B, who then would say person C. That's just way too much processing for me. So that one or two really good friends for me was what I aimed for.
Well, I'm going to ask one more question, and it was a question that was asked, and I can't remember which group, but you came in on Monday, and on Tuesday we visited our ACE program over at ULA Little Rock, and you talked to the students there who are getting a college experience and work experience, and then you talked to some of our students in our K through 12 private school, the Academy at Riverdale. And I can't remember which setting it was, but one of them asked the question, which I thought was just very poignant. Have you ever felt ashamed of being diagnosed, and how have you handled that? What have you done to overcome that?
And that was just a magical question, especially the strength of the word ashamed. That's not a word used very often. So that word really was really powerful. And myself, I did feel that shame, so to speak, right after my diagnosis when the internet said I had no hope. Other people on the spectrum, if you've met one, you've met one. I've talked to individuals or parents that their child, they don't want to hear the name. They don't want to acknowledge a diagnosis. They want they want no acknowledgement of it whatsoever. Others, as I have now, wear it with a badge of, it's a merit badge of sorts, because our strengths can be really beautiful, and yeah, there's challenges that I think there, if you should know, can be aggravating to live with. Sensory issues are exhausting, but everybody has their own challenges. Everybody has their strengths, weaknesses. I just happen to know mine.
Yeah.
And as I told the student sort of that type of thought process, I could see him perk up and go, yeah, because I believe there's no such thing as normal. If we do find that one normal person, I think there's probably one. If we find that one normal person out there, congratulations, we have found the most boring individual on the planet. So that's my definition of normal. It's a myth. I think everybody, even normal people, want to be normal. That's just how it is. So when you start chasing that normal, you're chasing a phantom that doesn't exist. You will never get there. And when you start chasing that, you forget who you are. And that's a big trap. Even I, to this day, will fall into that about once a quarter or so. When you start chasing that myth, you lose the fact of who you are. And so many of us, everybody is beautiful in their own way. And if they lose sight of that, if they forget who they are, they're always going to be chasing that phantom.
Well, thank you for sharing who you are with us today, Aaron, and sharing the hope and insights that you've provided from your own experience of living with autism. Aaron's book, Finding Kansas, is available on Amazon. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today as we explore the topic of education with our guest, Aaron Likens. We hope you have left with a little more insight, understanding, and acceptance, perhaps some ideas that you can put into practice. And if you're able, please join us for the other two seminars that we've got, our webinars in this three-part series, The Race for Understanding. At 3 o'clock, we will be talking with Aaron about employment and autism. And at 5:30, we will be talking about living independently in the community and traveling, and some other great stories you have about that. So we encourage you to learn more about Aaron, as well as the services we provide here at Easterseals, Arkansas. If you haven't registered yet, you can visit eastersealsar.com and register now. A recording of this and the other webinars will be available on Easterseals Arkansas's YouTube channel. So be sure to subscribe and like our videos. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.